introduction. It's just me, always. And yeah, here we go. We're live.
Okay.
Rolling. So Jeremy Evans.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. No worries. So we've been connected forever.
Yeah.
But we've never met like so many. But you're a sports attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sports entertainment lawyer. Been doing that for like 11 and a half years.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, like you said, with LinkedIn. I mean, you connect with people and but here it is where, we're in your studio and you're back from all your adventures. I love it.
Yeah. It's been nice because, coming back to North America after like 25 years away.
Yeah.
And trying to like reconnect with everyone has been fun. And especially like you said, you just connect with people. Sometimes you never actually get to meet them.
Right.
But
Special occasions.
special occasions. Exactly. But I was super interested in talking to you because like sports and money is changed a lot in the last few years. And I would love to get, some of your insights into this. But first of all, let's start with you. Where are you from?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So grew up here in Southern California. Wait, you're a local. I am. Born in Northridge Hospital.
Okay.
Grew up in North Hollywood. And then family moved out to Simi Valley, Moore Park area.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were in Palmdale, Lancaster. We had a big family. I'm the youngest of 9 kids.
9. That's a story unto itself.
It is. It is. And I have 50 nephews and nieces now.
50.
50. And then I've got like, I think 5 or 6 great nephews and nieces or whatever that name would be.
Yeah.
So nephews and nieces having kids.
Grand nephews and nieces, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe that's what it is.
Do you guys have like a family get together every summer, like where everyone just like, you have to rent out a park for that?
Museum.
Museum.
It's unfortunate because families grow and it's hard to like get everybody together, but we'll get little groups of people together.
Yeah. Well, that's better than nothing, right?
Agreed. And I do love it. And I make it a point to call my brothers and sisters every Sunday.
Yeah.
So start from the oldest, move down to the youngest.
You got to make 9 calls every week.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't pick up, so it makes it a little bit easier.
It's easier just to send WhatsApp messages. Hey, you bastard, how you doing?
Right.
Still alive? Okay,
Right.
Everything's good?
Sometimes it's just a text. Hey, I can't call,
Yeah.
But grew up in LA. Always wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
I think probably got that from watching Law and Order episodes, honestly.
Yeah.
And thought that I wanted to be a DA. And then went to UCLA for undergrad, law school in San Diego. Came back to LA and got an LLM and an MBA from Pepperdine. And the reason I got into sports entertainment, which is I think an important topic, is I had wanted this dream of like becoming, a DA. Thought I'd become a DA. And
a district attorney working for the government to prosecute
crimes. Absolutely.
All right.
Thought that was my goal. Wanted to get into it. I worked for the public defender, worked for the courts, worked in civil litigation. And at the end of it, I said, I dislike this. There's no way I'm doing this.
Oh, really? So you went through the whole process.
Went through the whole thing.
You ticked all the boxes and then you're like, nope.
Right. I'm not doing it.
Wow, you're so lucky you didn't keep doing it.
Agree.
Because you were too far. You were so far along that trail.
Right.
That some people don't have the courage to walk away.
Right. So I was just like, I've worked too hard. I'm going to do what I love. Right.
Right.
So I started to do some soul searching and a couple things happened. One was I competed in, and this is going to sound really nerdy, and it is, a baseball arbitration competition at Tulane Law School down in New Orleans, where you're arguing over numbers, and it's all in a sort of fantasy environment,
right?
But you're getting to argue in front of GMs and general counsels of major teams. So I did this. We didn't win the competition, but it motivated me to start my own competition, which I called the National Sports Law Negotiation Competition. I ran that for 7 years. I think might have been one of the only profit-making endeavors of the law school,
Right.
But which is typical in academics, The law school I went to was great. Obviously, UCLA is a great school. Pepperdine's great, but did all that, started this competition, and then I started to think, I should really get into sports and entertainment. Like, this is something that I love. I just never put 2 and 2 together.
Really? Because that's why I wanted to talk with you, because every athlete now is their own brand,
right?
And all these athletes are getting so into business and beyond just doing contracts for their sporting teams,
right?
Like you've got them owning companies, investing, running their own, private equity companies in some cases. Like I feel like sports has completely evolved as a business, and the landscape is completely altered.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And when I first got into it, it was very humble. It was like there was no name, image, and likeness. There was no college. There was huge contracts, but it's completely different. Now only in 10 years' time. Really, in the last 5 years, it's grown. But I started my own practice, and at the time, very naive, to start your own business with no money, no investment, and of course, get into the hardest area that you can, entertainment and sports.
Right.
And so here we are 11 years later. I mean, I love it. It's great, but yeah.
Fighting every day.
Every day.
Every damn day. No, for sure. So you come out of law school. It's very interesting, actually, that you had this initial dream of like fighting crime, like working for the DA. How many years was that in your mind as being like the end goal of spending all this time with like going through law school?
Oh man, 5 years old, 6 years old.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That young. My mom had asked me at the time. She said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?"
Yeah.
I was 5 years old, and I said, President of the United States and a DA or like a lawyer,
Yeah.
He's like, well, why? I said, I want to help people and I like to argue. Of course, it's classic because I don't like to argue. I like to put deals together, but anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to win.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But no, you caught me with the Law and Order reference because we're about the same age, I guess, because I guess if we were any younger, we would be watching Suits.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Excellent. No, that's good. So how hard was it for you to change your path from going on the DA track of working for the government, fighting crime, to then opening your own practice?
I think it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be because it was more just I had colleagues that were like, Jeremy, you should become a solo practitioner. And I was at the time, I was like, well, what's a solo practitioner?
What is a solo practitioner?
Right.
Like just be running around on your own?
Running your own practice, like you start your own business. And at the time, I thought there was only a couple kinds of lawyers. You work for a big firm, you work for the government, and then you work for a company. That was what I thought.
Yeah.
And ultimately realized that 60 to 70% of the lawyers in California are solo and small firm, which could be 1 to like 5 lawyers.
Oh, really? So they band together.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what happened was I had friends that were like, Jeremy, you should really be a solo. And I was like, well, why? They were like, well, you're good with people, you know people, you're involved in all these projects, you should really do this.
Well, that's all positive because the flip side of that is you hate everyone and people hate you and you don't get along with anyone, right? That's
right.
Or you're a control freak.
Right.
I get that a lot. That's why I'm here, actually. I had running my own show because I'm a control freak. But no, please.
I love it.
Sorry.
No. But it's, but I think recognizing those things is important, right?
Yeah.
So it was like when they told me this, I said, okay, maybe I'll start my own practice. Once I made that decision, which is probably one of the hardest decisions I've had to make in my life, because when you open your practice, it's not like all of a sudden you open your door, you open your website, you launch it, and all of a sudden there's 50 clients waiting for you. That feeling is very lonely and very empty. But to be able to do all that, you just got to have a lot of courage. You'll be able to jump off in the deep end and go, okay, something's going to happen. And when I did all that, once I made that decision, it was like, okay, well, what law do I want to practice? Because I knew criminal defense and I knew the criminal aspect from the DA and from public defender and the courts, but I had this experience doing this competition or these competitions, and I said, I really do love sports and entertainment. I played baseball growing up, loved watching movies, grew up part of my life in Hollywood, right? So I thought this is perfect, and that's really kind of where it came out of.
Yeah.
So.
Let's dig back into your baseball career.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because obviously, Canadian kids grow up playing hockey.
Right.
American kids grow up playing, American football and baseball. But what was your early baseball experience like?
I love the game of baseball. It's my favorite sport. I love watching it. I love analyzing it. I think the dream job would be like front office, of a baseball team.
Yeah.
Would be amazing.
Well, they have in-house lawyers, don't they?
They do.
They do, because they have to go through all the contracts and all the stadium stuff. It's really hectic. I had a friend that did that, actually.
Really?
He worked for one of the MLS teams in Canada, Toronto.
Nice.
Yeah. He was an in-house attorney, or shadowing an in-house attorney, maybe as an assistant or.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of attorneys that do that. You got to figure you got to have at least one for each team. It's a small group, but one, maybe two, maybe three for each team in each league. But what's interesting is I sort of had this vision of, well, I'm going to open my own shop and kind of get in. But when I was going back to the baseball thing, if I would have had the drive that I have now in terms of opening my practice and doing all this, when I was a teenager, I probably could have done something with the career.
Yeah.
I had a skill set, but I didn't care enough. Honestly, I would rather go out on Friday night, wanted to be with friends. The idea of traveling on a bus and going just did not appeal to me at all. I remember one time I had one of the coaches say, "Jeremy, you're fast. You should try out for the track team." I was like, "I don't got time for that, coach."
Yeah.
Like,
too busy living.
I got people to see, And looking back, I'm glad that it didn't work out, though, because as a baseball player, you're using your body and your mind, but eventually your body runs out, right? And you got to move on to something else. And a lot of those players have a tough time transitioning. And I thought, well, as a lawyer, as long as my brain keeps working, I can have 50, 60 years if I still want to do the job, right?
Or just get LeBron James's personal trainer and retire and sports teams and keep playing until you're 60.
That's right. Or retire, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. That's interesting, actually, because I grew up playing Division I basketball in Canada. So I completely committed myself from the age of like 6 or 7 to the age of 22 to sports. Yeah. And I went through all the college recruiting and then played all through college, and it was definitely a long haul. Yeah. And I remember I had all these other interests, but you didn't have any time or energy to pursue any of them. And then when I was finally done with my career, all those other interests just overwhelmed me. Yeah. And it was like hard to choose what I wanted to pursue and what I wanted to do. First time in my life I was free.
You're about 6'3". Yeah. 6'3".
I was point guard. I was like one of the smallest guys on my team.
And now in hockey, you're probably like the main goal scorer. You're probably fast, skinny, right?
I have a hockey story. I never really played hockey because I couldn't skate.
Really?
Yeah. That's why I started playing basketball. I couldn't skate, and this is not an excuse for people out there, but I had the weakest ankles. I grew tall too fast. Yeah. And when I was like 13, 14, 15, like I grew up really quick, and my ankles and my feet, I was like breaking ankles, twisting ankles, and I just never got really comfortable on skates.
Now, what about in basketball? Was it easier for you there?
In basketball, it was a lot easier, and I felt a lot more comfortable, and the height helped, and I don't know, I just gravitated towards that much more. My father was an Olympian, actually. He played water polo in the 1972 Olympics. So, like, I was around water. He tried to get me into swimming and water polo at a young age, which I did do, but it didn't really stick. But basketball, I don't know, it just worked for me.
Probably helped for your training, though.
Yeah, I think so. It was helpful, to be able to play all those different sports and appreciate them. And then later on in life, I played a lot of rugby too, which I really enjoyed. But I never got into baseball.
That's a tough sport.
Rugby. Yeah. But I could never get into baseball because I was afraid of the ball. I was afraid of the pitcher because, sometimes they throw it right inside there.
There's a quote about that. Days of Thunder, one of my favorite favorite movies in general, right? But there's this
Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Robert Duvall, yeah. He has this great line where he's like talking to Nicole Kidman, who's the doctor, and says something like, "You'll never catch a race car driver in a hospital." And the point being is that athletes don't like to be reminded of the fact that like something bad could happen. Mm-hmm. So I remember the first time I got plugged in the nose with a baseball, it didn't feel well, because as you're trying to catch it, it went through the mitt.
Oh, really?
And then hit me right in the nose, bloody nose immediately. Or if you're batting and you get plugged somewhere, it hurts.
Yeah.
If you miss a grounder and it hits you in your cup, or if you're not wearing a cup, it's a problem.
It's a problem. Wow. So what position did you play?
So third base, I had a pretty strong arm. Center field, shortstop.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you played all through what, high school?
Yeah, no, into high school, I wasn't good enough to make the high school team, or at least just wasn't committed enough to it.
Yeah.
I knew all the guys. I ended up one of my first clients was one of the guys that played on the high school team.
Amazing.
He got drafted to the Dodgers, and he was a shortstop, and it was one of my first clients.
No, that's wonderful. That's nice that it came full circle and that you got to represent and really help one of your friends or people
awesome.
you grew up with. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So what was it like? What was it like growing up in Hollywood, in LA, and having to choose between what, like hanging out with friends, playing baseball, getting into trouble?
I chose trouble most of the time, I think. I was often, we'd be in situations where it's like, I was raised by like great parents. My parents are awesome. My family's great. So I had good values growing up, right? So I knew like...
How many people just don't say that?
Right.
How many people are like, my family's terrible, my parents were the worst? Yeah. That's great though.
My parents were awesome. But I was in many ways raised by the community too, because there were so many kids. My parents both worked to pay for all those 9 kids. I was out on my own all the time. Right. My parents often tell jokes that I was known by the cops by first name because I would often take off for the day and disappear as a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old. They're like, where is this guy?
Right.
But
back when the streets were safe.
That's right.
That's right. A long time ago.
And it was just, I don't know. I feel like I was raised well. So if I saw my friends doing something, I'd be like, I'm not doing that. There was a line for me, and it was like, all right, I'm not crossing that.
Sure.
But to me, it was funny. I remember I threw this party in high school. Classic. My parents found out about it. Huge party. I think we had about 500 people in the house.
500 people.
500.
Is this the original story that Superbad the movie was based on?
Yes. Actually, I just watched that recently, and I was like, that's the party. That was my party. I was like, they took that idea from me. Somebody found out. But so we went through all this, and I remember I had my brother-in-laws show up. They were bigger guys, and they show up. They ran the door. And then it's like at certain points of the night, I got too many people. I'd be like, all right, push this crowd out, we need to get people out. Anyway, my parents found out, but it was like the next day, I had my buddy come over with an industrial carpet cleaner he had, cleaned the carpets. Thankfully, nothing was stolen. I mean, I wasn't a bad kid. I liked to have fun. I liked people. Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Yeah.
No.
That's epic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's good. I think that it's amazing, like how much things have changed. Like I remember taking the subway all around Toronto when I was growing up, and I was probably like 10, even younger maybe. And I had friends that were riding the subway in New York City when they were like 10, 11. Now parents don't let their kids do anything.
It's sad.
Yeah.
It really is. Neighborhoods have changed. I mean, even when I grew up in Moore Park, it was a great neighborhood. I think it's still okay now. Palmdale, Lancaster has completely changed. When I grew up there, it was kind of a cow and horse town, and you had some development, but the mall wasn't even built. You kind of had to find things to do, which I loved. It's like here you can go, oh, let's go to the In-N-Out, or let's do this or that. It's like up in Palmdale, it was like, no, let's go find this open dirt area where they didn't build houses, but they built these steps for houses. And let's just hang out there, and we have different names for the locations.
Right.
Like let's go to the Flats. Let's go to this. Let's go to whatever it was. Let's go to number 1, number 2, number 3. Anyway, and you had like car races out there. It was kind of an interesting time.
Oh, wow.
Which I don't know if those things still happen anymore.
Yeah. Fast and the Furious kind of took over for the car racing.
That's right.
Stuff. Did they actually have people like throw the thing up to get going?
That's right.
So your interest in being a DA early is interesting to me. Did you ever like have any run-ins with like the law that kind of facilitated that desire to like help people or to kind of come down on the right side of the law?
Yeah, I think probably some of it. Never had any issues with the law from myself. Couple of traffic tickets and things like that, right? But that was actually later on because I didn't get my license till I was 18, so I didn't drive in high school.
Which is Probably a good thing. Yeah, it's always people always get in trouble driving in high school. Yeah,
and if you got 8 brothers and sisters, I mean, it's not like your parents are getting a car for every person, right? So
true.
And my older brothers and sisters crashed a couple cars, so that kind of did for the younger ones, right?
Right.
For the best.
For the best.
But you know, I don't know. It's interesting. I think for me, it was my upbringing. I felt like I was a good person, and I felt like I could navigate like good relationships and decipher between. I feel like I had a good sort of thermometer, if you will, in determining like good personalities or not. Like I could meet with somebody and be like, all right, this person has like good values, or this person has like a good heart, and I could tell that immediately by talking with them.
That's a hell of a skill. Like that's not a small thing. But you're right. Like people do give off like a vibe, right?
Yeah.
And being able to sense like, you know, who you can trust, who you want to talk to, who you don't want to talk to.
Right.
This is
like when I met you, I was like, I trust this guy. You know, this guy's a good guy. Seriously, I was like,
I'm trying.
Right.
We're getting there. the guy with the cat. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Wild. So you come out of all these. I mean, how many different schools did you go to get your degree?
So I did, you know, it's funny, when I came through, I was in high school. I was not the greatest student my first 2 years. It wasn't great. Junior, senior year, went to the AP classes, like the high level classes, really put some work in. I had a friend of mine, I was actually just thinking about her the other day. Great woman. She's married now with 2 kids. But she was a great mentor to me, and she probably doesn't even know this, but I should probably tell her.
Mm-hmm.
She encouraged me to go to junior college at the time. I didn't have any plans to go to school, didn't have the grades for it. I don't know if I even put in applications. I may have, but got denied. And she goes, you should really go to junior college. It's inexpensive. At the time, I think it was free, or like $11 a unit. It was nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the local junior college. I finished my AA in 1 year because I loved it so much. Great education. And then I got into this transfer program to UCLA. So I got my bachelor's from UCLA, then law school down in San Diego. Mm-hmm. So that was, let's say, 7 years total between the bachelor's and the law degree.
Yeah.
I think 6 years in actuality, but 7 years in terms of what the degrees usually take. The MBA was a year and a half, and the LLM was a year.
Wow.
So 9 years.
9 years.
8 years of schooling.
So how do you mentally prepare to spend, 8, 9, 10 years educating yourself to then go out into the world and hunt for work, especially as a sole practitioner or setting up your own firm? Like that's a huge call. I mean, I remember when I finished university, I ran for the fences. Like I was done with higher education, and I couldn't sit still anymore.
It's such a good question because education's changed, and frankly, the education has to make sense for you to go. I think for me, when I wanted to be a lawyer in my early sort of years of life, I had no idea what the expectations were. I didn't know any lawyers. I was the only one in my family to go to college, only one to go to graduate school. All my brothers and sisters got married by the time they were 18, 19, 20 years old, and they all had kids.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
Right.
Yeah.
So I lived a completely different life because I got to watch them and see, and of course, that woman never came into my life that was like, oh, this is the woman I want to marry, I hope that it does, but at least to this point, it hasn't happened, right? So when I went through all that, I sort of had, this epiphany of, sort of wanting to work through all that, but, here we are.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Like I've spoken to a few other people who have done higher education and stuff like that, and they just kind of loved it. Like, being part of the university system, learning something new every day, and feeling that kind of like you're in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Like the higher education experience is definitely like a bubble where you kind of don't have to worry about everything else going on in the world. You can just study and do your thing. And that can become incredibly comfortable, so much so that you don't want to go out and swim with the sharks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. For the case for me, UCLA was obviously intense, difficult school to get into, difficult school to stay into. You're the best competition in the world, right? And that was hard, going from junior college and being one of the top students to getting into UCLA and not being one of the top students, But you adjust. Law school was interesting. I had an amazing time in law school, met great people, started competitions, traveled. did 2 overseas study abroad trips where I did 29 cities in 19 countries in 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And I had never left the United States prior to that. My first landing was in China. I mean, it was crazy. So we could probably talk for hours about that. But
I would love to go back to that China story. We will. But keep going.
But I took 3 years off in between UCLA and law school. And then I didn't go back to school to get an LLM and the MBA until graduated 2011. I didn't go back to school until 2017. And when I did the MBA and the LLM, both in entertainment, media, and sports, I worked full time. So no problem. I just stacked my classes, did things online, whatever it was. I had no interest in being an academic or anything. To me, I sort of put everything through the lens of, and this is the point I wanted to get to, of geography, branding, and community. Meaning, I knew that if I wanted to be serious about entertainment and sports, I had to be in Los Angeles because I was in San Diego for law school, right?
Right.
Loved it down there. It's paradise, but there's no industry, at least for entertainment and sports, or limited.
Yeah. You have to come to the big city if you want to play with the big boys and girls, right? That's the point, yeah.
Exactly. And so when I came here, I was like, okay, Pepperdine's in Los Angeles. It's got a great brand, and they have a huge alumni base for community. I'm like, it fits all 3, prongs. I'm going to do it. And of course, the MBA there's a little funny story about this. When I was looking at the MBA, I didn't want to take any more standardized tests, right? I'd taken the bar exam.
Oh my God. I remember, I think I did my GMATs. I mean, I definitely had to do SATs because I almost came down to the United States for college to play basketball. So I did my SATs. But I think I was studying for my GMATs for a few weeks. I was thinking about going to business school maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember I just stopped like dead in my tracks.
It's oh my gosh. So I ended up getting it waived, right?
Oh.
So the SATs I got waived too because I did the junior college transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And then so LSAT, I had to take that for law school. But then for the GMAT, I had told myself, I had taken a business class when I was getting my LLM, Master's of Law at Pepperdine. And I fell in love with the business curriculum. And I said, man, if I could ever get to a point where I could get somebody to pay for this, waive the GMAT, and waive some of my units in from my prior degrees, count me in. Sure enough, I got a call 6 months later from Pepperdine. Said, we're going to pay you a salary to run, to be a project manager for our Institute for Entertainment, Media, Sports, and Culture, plan events, which you're already doing in the community.
Right.
We'll waive your GMAT score. You start school on Monday. And we're going to waive in 12 units from your prior degrees. And the first 4 units of every, this is a deal they give all employees, first 4 units of every, that you take are free. You'll pay taxes on it after a certain amount.
Right.
And then every additional unit is 25% off. And it goes up 5% every year. I said, count me in.
And you're at a great school and doing great things. And you're connected to the community, right? Of course.
Yeah.
Amazing. And what was it like being out at Pepperdine? That's in Malibu, right?
Oh my gosh, it was beautiful. The LLM was in Malibu, and then the MBA was in a mix between Malibu and what do they call it? Silicon Beach.
Mm-hmm.
So like West LA, Howard Hughes Center, that sort of part of town. Because they've got campuses all over the world. I think they just opened one in Switzerland.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so now we got to go back.
Yeah.
So your first trip out of the United States was to China.
Yeah.
Yeah. Walk me through that.
Oh my gosh. So flew into Hong Kong at LAX, and I literally had a map at home, one of those like little fake little like cartoon maps that you get like in New York City, like at like one of those little pop-up shops.
Yeah. What year are we talking about here? Because I lived in China for 18 years.
2009.
Okay. Yeah, that's nice. Right after the financial crisis.
That's correct. Yeah.
Nice and fresh.
Well, of course, that's why it was so hard to get into law school because everybody was trying to go back to school because the economy was so bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I put a map out and I said, these are the places I want to go. And so I flew into Hong Kong, and then the program was in Hangzhou for 3 weeks. And then we did weekend trips to Shanghai, Suzhou. And then I met a friend there who invited me to come up to Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to walk on the Great Wall of China at 6 o'clock in the morning when nobody else was there, try all kinds of crazy foods. It's interesting. You know, the Chinese have always been good at, and of course, people who are lovers of intellectual property would not like this, but they do really good things in copying other things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, they do it in food and they also do it in music.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember we were in a karaoke spot and they love karaoke over there.
Mm.
And as you know, 8-story buildings, every floor's got karaoke, different rooms. And I remember seeing these guys, these Chinese gentlemen singing Hotel California by the Eagles. And I remember they were singing this, and I'm like, man, these guys sound better than the Eagles. And, ultimately it was and a couple Chinese guys. Now, of course, if you try to talk to them, they didn't, like, you couldn't communicate because I didn't know Chinese. They didn't know English, but they knew that song.
Yeah, they can rhyme off the lyric to any English song, but holding a conversation and getting the pronunciation or the grammar right is not possible.
Agreed.
It's amazing out there.
Right.
What was your experience like in Hangzhou? Because I love that town. I worked for the New York Times for many years, and we were in Hangzhou all the time because I was like the home of Alibaba and Jack Ma and all these great
Marco Polo too. Did Marco Polo go through there?
Yes, he did. Marco Polo did. Yeah, that's where he said he came back with the idea for noodles and pasta and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a long history of Marco Polo in China and many various places.
Azerbaijan, other places. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you liked Hangzhou.
Loved it. The way they described it to us was like it's the Beverly Hills of China. That's what was described to us. I don't know if I would call it that.
I'm gonna have to borrow that from you at some stage. Hangzhou is the Beverly Hills of China.
That's what was told to me. Yeah,
that's pretty interesting.
It was epic. We had a blast. Obviously, there was the other complication to this was at that time there was some sort of breakout. It wasn't the swine flu, but it was something along those lines.
Every couple of years there's something going on in China.
We landed, it's like we had to change our plans. We couldn't do certain things. We had security at the hotel all the time.
Oh, right.
I'd never experienced anything like that. We still felt free. The best thing about that city was running around the lake, seeing all the little bridges and gardens. It was fantastic. And then from there I went to Korea, Okinawa, Japan to see a buddy who was stationed in the Air Force. Then I went to Turkey and Israel, Greece, France, Belgium, Ireland, Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, London, and then other parts around France, Monaco, and some other cities there. And then ultimately flew to New York, caught a Yankee game, flew to Seattle, caught a Mariners game, and then back to San Diego.
That's epic.
Yeah.
So you just got on a plane, LAX, flew west, landed in the east.
That's right.
And then worked your way back west.
Epic journey.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I don't think enough people take the time to do that kind of stuff. So it's amazing you afforded yourself that luxury. Yeah.
Glad I did. I mean, look, as a law student, probably shouldn't have been spending that kind of money, but to me, it was like, I'm never going to have this opportunity again. Very unlikely.
Yeah, it's true.
You
have to, I think that's one of the reasons why I moved to China when I was 22, just because there was no risk to it. Like when you're young and you have the time and the effort, to put into something like that, I think you have to do it because the older you get, you have debts, you have mortgages, car payments. And then of course, if you're self-employed, like we both are, you're hunting for work all the time. So you can't just, you can't be in Austria on the side of a mountain for months. So yeah, it's hard.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's crazy because that gave me and I'm sure it's the same with you, that gave me the encouragement to do it again. So years later, when I got elected as president for the California Lawyers Association, which is the largest state bar, I think, in the country, one of the largest ones, I had an opportunity to go to London for a legal London program. Now, of course, I went there, did the program in London for a week, and then Edinburgh, Scotland for a week. But then after that, I said, I'm going to make my own trip. I'm already over here. So on my own dime, I flew down to South Africa, went on safari, amazing experience.
Yeah.
And then flew from there to Miami for a bar conference. And then from Miami back to Dana Point for another bar conference. And then I was finally home.
So being an international lawyer is sounding pretty attractive, actually. I would like to jump on some of these trips as well. This is pretty nice. South Africa, Miami.
Yeah.
You're seeing the world.
And then I did it again the next year. I had a client that was playing at Wimbledon, and I went on a World War II trip that I was invited on, and to basically through the World War II Museum down in New Orleans. And so they went to Germany and Poland. So I flew into London, caught Wimbledon, amazing experience.
Yeah.
Saw my client, then flew to Germany and Poland, rode around on some buses there. Very somber experience, of course, but saw amazing things. amazing people. And then I flew to, out of Poland, flew to Barcelona for another bar conference with the Spanish down there.
Sounds tough, man.
Yeah, it's a tough life.
One. Yeah,
tough life. And then from there, I said, well, I'm already in Spain. I always wanted to go to Marrakesh, Morocco. So I went to Marrakesh. Ridiculous experience. Have never felt more uncomfortable, but excited at the same time.
Did you go to the night market in Marrakesh and eat and with all the people in the evening?
Amazing. Did the whole Cobra thing. Did the whole experience.
Yeah. Cobras are fun. I had a guide in Morocco. I filmed an episode of my show there. We were up in the Atlas Mountains hiking.
Oh yeah, to the east there.
Yeah, and then we didn't go out into the desert, which is where most people go, but we went up and climbed Mount Toubkal, which is the highest mountain in North Africa, which was great. It was like January or February, but I remember that night market was beautiful, and I remember my guide was trying to get me to eat goat eyes, which were terrible.
Did you do it?
I did, for camera, of course, but almost threw up after.
It's worth the try once.
It's worth the try.
You wouldn't do it again, but
yeah.
China was the same way, by the way.
Yeah.
As you know, it was like they offered goat. When I was in Beijing specifically, it was like goat liver doused in hot sauce.
Mm-hmm.
The duck they gave you was like that blackened duck.
Mm.
And they also feed you the tongue, and they put it inside this little gelatin.
Yeah.
The brain, all those things. Wouldn't do it again, but good experience.
Glad you made that happen. No, the food. The best part about traveling internationally is the food. If you're a foodie, it's absolutely incredible.
Agreed.
Okay, so with all the international traveling aside, you're now a sole practitioner.
Yes.
In Los Angeles.
Yes.
And you're dealing specifically with athletes.
Athletes and entertainers. So I do entertainment and sports. So I work with writers, producers, directors. Everything's deal making, drafting contracts, negotiating, copyright, trademark. That's pretty much it. College athletes, NIL deals. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's break this down, because I think I'm so interested in this because most people don't really know how this business works.
Sure.
But you run this business.
Right.
Lawyers run the entertainment industry. Lawyers run the sports industry. So you're, a very important cog in this wheel of business. I mean, what's it like kind of having your finger on the pulse of all these different activities, like being in entertainment and sports at the same time in LA,
right.
A city of like 30 million,
right?
Beyond the city limits, it must be pretty epic.
It is really great, and especially if you've got good relationships and friendships, like when you can get together with your friends from the different agencies and your friends from the different studios and streamers, and you get to hear about what they're working on and the deals that they're working on, and it's fantastic because you're proud of them, you're happy with them and what they're doing.
Yeah.
It is interesting in this town though, because you have sort of like the big power brokers at the big agencies and the big law firms, but then you've got a lot of small firms and a lot of mid-sized firms that do a lot of the work as well, like the boutique firms. And so it's interesting because you'll get people calling you. They'll say, hey, I'm a writer and I've got I'm making this pitch to, Warner Brothers, Discovery, and you have to have a lawyer or an agent attached to this project to even get in the room.
Sure.
So that's sort of interesting. But then you also have to deal with the Talent Agencies Act in California, which basically says that you cannot procure employment for somebody, which means anything from saying an email to doing any of that, unless you're a registered talent agent, even for lawyers. So it's very interesting, the dynamic. So agents have a lot of sway in the industry, in the entertainment side. I would say on the sports side, it's different. NIL specifically allowed agents and lawyers to do the work.
What's NIL?
So that's the name, image, and likeness for like college athletes.
Oh, okay.
So there was a law that was passed in 2021 called, at least in California, called the Fair Pay to Play Act. And then Florida passed its law. Now there's like 30 other state laws that essentially said college athletes can profit off their name, image, and likeness. Of course, once California passed its law, NCAA changed its rules and now said, because for the longest time, it was two things you couldn't do. You cannot sign a contract with an agent and you cannot accept anything of value.
But how many movies when we were growing up involved, the dodgy talent or scout, the baseball scout or the basketball scout who who was buying these kids homes so that they would come to their D1 program. There's like a whole movie with like,
what was it, Nick Nolte movie?
Nick Nolte,
Blue Chips?
Shaquille O'Neal, Blue Chips. That's it. Blue Chips.
Anthony Hardaway, all those guys.
Yeah. They're all in that. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. That was a great movie.
Jerry Maguire, although that movie really was more professional. You weren't dealing on the college side. But yeah, I agree. And then, of course, you hear the Reggie Bush story, you know, and all these things. What's interesting about that, right, and I think the USC fans out here won't like that I say this. Go ahead.
Didn't they take a Heisman Trophy away from a kid because he took like a couple grand once from someone?
I don't know about that, but they definitely took it away from Reggie Bush.
Okay, yeah.
And because he got a house and a car. Now, the argument, I don't know if you've seen these billboards around town.
Like a kid doesn't
right.
He needs a roof over his head, and you take his fucking Heisman Trophy away? I mean, obviously it's more complicated than that, but I mean, this is crazy.
Well, you know, like talking about like lawyers and how like you're saying the lawyers run the industry. It's interesting because you see these billboards around town, and it's like free Reggie Bush, right? And the whole point was give Reggie Bush his Heisman back. The problem is that Reggie Bush at the time broke the rules. Now, it's not retroactive. NIL wasn't like, oh, retroactive, you can get this back.
Yeah.
That would bankrupt the college system for sure. But it is interesting because it brings up this idea of like, what is NIL? And this is the biggest thing happening now in college sports is, okay, even Jim Harbaugh, who just won the national championship, talked about this. And he said, I'd be willing to give up some of my salary to pay these players a percentage of the TV money. And it's an interesting concept. Because,
well, that must have shook the industry because coaches offering this kind of, I mean, these coaches make tens of millions of dollars a year sometimes.
They do, and that would be the low-hanging fruit. Now, coaches were going to fight this, of course. Mm-hmm. You don't want to give up the salary you've negotiated. This would be like...
Jim Harbaugh's made a lot of money over his career, though. Yeah, I can see it being difficult for like a young up-and-comer who just signed his first, multi-million-dollar, 100,000. It does, yeah. But also, too, I like that because, like, that's how much he appreciates his players.
Right.
And, he definitely won over a lot of hearts and minds in the locker room.
He did. And I think I like Jim Harbaugh. I think he's a great guy. He's got good values. It's interesting, though, because it really begs the question of what is NIL? Because NIL, as it's drafted in California, was supposed to be, okay, player goes out, brokers a deal with Nike or whoever, or some sports drink, promotes that product on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, TikTok, and then gets paid for it, either through three buckets: money, product, or equity in the company.
Right.
Now what's happening is you have collectives that are being formed that get money in from alumni and donors. Then they give it to the school that gives it to the players, or vice versa. They give it to the players, and the school kind of manages it. And actually, Florida just changed its law.
I wouldn't trust any school to manage my money.
Right? And isn't the whole point was to move away from the model that college was managing all this money so that the athletes would go out and do their own thing in the private market?
Well, they already manage huge endowments, right?
Right.
And we all see how that plays out. Like, it's hit and miss.
Right.
But to have the livelihood, if I was a college athlete, to have my livelihood being, managed by some officer at the school, it would be terrifying.
I agree. And I think it mixes compliance, right? Because there's a bunch of compliance officers. I know some of them at UCLA, and they go through the sort of make sure that these guys are brokering valid deals and something's not like shady or whatever. Now, of course, if you mix compliance with, now we're managing this, that's probably not a good thing. And at what point does the school come along and say,
when do they take a percentage?
Right. What's our percentage? What's our administrative fee for it?
Right. That's crazy.
Now, Florida just changed their law to now the schools can actually directly manage the money. Now, what the law also says is that schools cannot use NIL to recruit players. The problem is the facts are out there, especially for a public school. Let's use the University of Florida, for example, public school. If they say, all right, well, last year we brokered $50 million in NIL deals. Well, a student can see that, and he can go, I'm going to go to Florida because they have this much money.
And are those numbers like public? Like, do kids make decisions based on stuff like that?
If it goes through a public school, it would be public. If it's done as a private deal, would not be public, because it'd be like a private contract between you and me, right? Like, unless one of us disclosed it, nobody would know.
Okay, so let's use UCLA as an example because we're here in LA. So
And a public school.
and a public school, government-funded public school, right? So, which is a little different country to country. So the U.S. has a bit of a system where they have private universities and then they have public universities where students get a discount because there's some government funding and stuff like that. So UCLA, I play basketball at UCLA. I'm 20 years old, hot shit. And a drink company comes to me directly on Instagram and says, hey, we'll give you $10,000 if you drink our drink on your Instagram. You've got 3 million followers or something like that. According to this new NIL law, does that athlete have to go to UCLA to ask approval for that? Or can he or she just broker that deal themselves?
Broker that deal themselves, because what the NIL law in California says, you can broker whatever deal that you want. It just can't conflict with underlying university deals or policies. So if UCLA says you have to report that to us, then basically they would broker the deal, go to the compliance officer, say, hey, I signed this deal to promote this product, and they would basically sign off on it. I don't know how intense that approval process is, but that's pretty much what's happening. Now, also UCLA has a program called the Men of Westwood, and this is a collective where they ask alums and people in the community to put in money into this and then pay the players. So like when you hear things on the news like, oh, the offensive line was paid $1 million each or whatever it was, it's from those collectives.
College athletes get $1 million each in some cases?
As a number, I mean, typically what you're going to get, that it's going to be like, okay, let's say the offensive line, I think in Florida got $100,000 a piece, something like that. It's more like the target.
Sure.
For a big school, a big name quarterback, for example, gets into the transfer portal. This is why they called it the Wild West when this all went live, because NIL came live and the transfer portal went live.
What's the transfer portal?
So transfer portal is like, let's say that you play at UCLA, you don't want to play there anymore. Say you didn't get the starting job. You're like, I'm out. I want to transfer to Nebraska. I don't know, whatever.
You can do that?
You can transfer now.
You could do that back in the day too, but you didn't get any love.
Right. Yeah. It's more difficult. Now it's like you almost get your first 1 or 2 transfers are guaranteed. So guy's not starting, he transfers.
How many times can you transfer in a 4-year college degree, right?
I think there's a limit of 2 without some level of review, right? And of course, there's ways that you can work through this, like if the player has some mental issues, or they weren't getting along with their coach, and it's documented, and they actually spoke with a counselor, this sort of thing. There's ways to kind of move through that to get that third level, but generally it's two transfers and then that's it.
I find this space so confusing and interesting. So I'm really glad that you're here walking us through this. Because
crazy.
Because when we first started chatting, I didn't want the whole conversation to be focused on college,
right?
And how the NIL is changing college sports. But it was definitely part of what I wanted to chat with you about today. It's fascinating. Because I played college sports, we didn't get anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they would. Sometimes the teams would broker deals to get us jobs,
right,
where we could work around practice times.
Sure.
Usually at the university.
Sure.
And a few of the guys did that who needed some capital, but the thought of being paid at 18 to play ball would just blow my mind.
And also the industry's changed too. So for example, 3 things I want to mention with baseball, basketball, and football. So basketball has the one and done rule, right? You got to go to college for 1 year to get drafted into the NBA, unless you go play overseas.
Oh, but Kobe and LeBron didn't play.
So that was prior to the one and done rule being implemented.
Oh, so now when did that get implemented?
So basically, right after LeBron, then that first few years span, they introduced this one and done rule. So now the NCAA becomes essentially a market for a draft base to pull athletes from, right?
Yeah.
And there's been arguments that they should get rid of the one and done rule. So what did the NBA what have they done in response? There's now, the NBA didn't do this, but they have this. It's called the Overtime Elite League. High school players can basically get paid $100,000 a year to play in this league. They don't play in their high school league. They go to school, but then they play in this sort of private league, get paid. That's one way to kind of get around it, and then they can get drafted in to the NBA or something like that.
That's amazing. So the NBA, and this is run by the NBA.
No, the Overtime Elite's a private league. And now this is like the most elite players in the country, so very rare to get in. The NBA now has developed what's originally called the D League or the Developmental League.
Yeah, I've seen stuff for this. Like I was in Vegas a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, they do
watching
big thing in Vegas.
Yeah, they have a thing in Vegas every summer, right?
Right.
And they were promoting it because I was there for the mid-season tournament. I was watching some of it there, which was fantastic.
No, it's an awesome thing. A lot of my clients and a lot of agents around the country go to this thing. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm not an agent myself, but I have a lot of agents for clients and agencies for clients. And what's crazy is they can go do this, but then also it's called the G League now for Gatorade. So the Gatorade sponsored it. And they have a thing called the Professional Pathways Program, where basically if you're like the elite high school player, you can go into this and get paid, right? So like an earlier stage. It's more money, and then you can eventually sign a 2-way contract and get on an NBA team. The NFL does not have the equivalent unless you compare the merger between the USFL and the XFL as a minor league, which maybe that's what it becomes, spring football. But of course, they have a junior year rule, meaning that you cannot get drafted until you've reached your junior year.
And junior is year 3.
Correct. So that's interesting. And of course, baseball, the only thing I want to mention about baseball, all right, so a couple years ago, there was some litigation over this, but they settled it, some antitrust issues. Major League Baseball said, we're going to go from 160 minor league affiliated teams to 120. So those 40 minor league teams immediately sued and said, antitrust violation, Sherman Antitrust Act. You can't, you're running a, monopoly here, this whole thing.
Yeah, and people buy those minor league teams, and they play a huge role in the community. I think Bill Murray owns the famous actor. Yeah, he owns
St. Paul Saints.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, the guy that I represented with the Dodgers, I ended up signing him multi-year deals with that team.
Oh, really?
St. Paul Saints. Amazing team. Now, it was an independent league team. Now it's affiliated.
Oh.
Meaning that it's an official part of Major League Baseball.
It's crazy that the only reason I know that is because Bill Murray was the owner.
Right. I think he's got ownership rights in the South Carolina team, too.
That's right, because that's where he lives. He lives in South Carolina. For as mysterious a man as he is, he does. I think he does live in South Carolina.
He likes to crash weddings from time to time down there, I guess.
Yes.
So baseball said, let's go from 160 to 140. And then they also said, let's reduce the amount of rounds for the draft from 40 to 20. Well, where do all those college kids now go? Or all those folks who are coming out of high school that would normally get drafted? Now they're going to go to college. So I think we're going to see an uptick in the value of baseball from a college standpoint, which has never been a really big moneymaker, except for the College World Series. But I think you're going to see some changes there because all those athletes are not being drafted now. And with NIL and the transfer portal, changes everything.
Really?
Yeah.
This is wild. My cousin was a big time Canadian baseball player, and he went to my aunt and uncle are going to kill me if I don't get this right. I think he went to the University of Alabama.
Yeah.
And he was in the Blue Jays program for a few years, but then eventually left because it was just a grind, and he was kind of done with it. But baseball, I feel, is the most brutal of them all.
It is. It's a blue-collar sport in that way. People might laugh at me for saying that, but the reality of it is most guys don't see the light of day in terms of a Major League Baseball roster, 40-man, 25-man roster, until you're about 5-6 years in.
Right.
So you get drafted at 18, and of course, once you get in, your clock runs, you have to reach 6 years before you reach free agency.
Right.
So
what are the universities doing about all this? Because I feel like, so for example, I played college basketball, very grateful for the opportunity, loved my teammates, loved my coach. Well, we were off and on my coach, but like all good coaching relationships. But I would have, I grew so much as a human being during those 4 years, matured like a lot, learned how to deal with all kinds of problems, success, failure, everything in between. Like without that buffer time to, quote unquote, grow up, it would have been crazy walking right into an NBA team with a $10 million a year contract. Like, how does any 18 or 19-year-old deal with that?
It's tough. I mean, I'll tell you what the schools have done to combat that is they bring in partners like there's a group, and my buddy Casey's actually the CEO, Altius Sports Partners, or ASP. Oliver Luck's involved. It's a very big group. They will broker deals with the universities and train the universities and the students in financial sort of matters and how to broker these deals. And
that's brilliant.
So
that's
it's educational.
Really smart.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Casey's a great guy. He was with the NFL Network for a while, with the NFL Players Association. So he was dialed into all that. Created this. It's been fantastic to what he's been able to build. So that helps. I think also with these athletes now not restricted in sense of, used to be everything was done behind the scenes, right? So like if somebody wanted to, now
everything's on Instagram.
Right, of course. So so if somebody wanted to be like, well, I'm going to broker this deal, it's like, okay, but you have to get a lawyer and an agent. So now you have some level of protection.
Right.
Whereas when you're doing it behind the scenes or under the table, it was like, well, I'm going to have my uncle do it or my dad do it. And that's where you get into problems.
How far away? So all this is new to me. Obviously, I've been abroad forever, and no one takes sports as seriously as the Americans. So it's great to have you today to explain all this to me and everyone out there. But it seems to me like these colleges are spending a ton of time recruiting, scouting, and you're putting all this time and effort into a player that probably won't even stay like 2 years, like might just be a one and done. Like how do you build? I mean, I grew up, in an era of like Duke and Kentucky, these dynasties that were built by these coaches over decades, like, and players never left.
Right.
They came to play for 4 years. And then when that player came out of those programs, you knew that was going to be, a rock solid NBA, starter.
Sure.
Like, how do these coaches deal with this like, okay, I have no idea who's going to be part of our team next year, even though we recruited this guy for 7 years?
It is tough. It's hard because with with the football NCAA, it's a little bit easier because you've got like a runway of about 3 years usually, unless the guy transfers. That changes things.
Right.
Baseball's a little bit different because generally guys are going to stay for 4 years, but that even changes because sometimes they didn't like their draft status when they got in out of high school, so they'll go play for 1 or 2 years and get a higher draft call.
Right.
Like Chase Utley did that. Chase Utley was drafted by the Dodgers and then ultimately didn't like where he was drafted, went to play for UCLA and got drafted higher, went to the Phillies.
And that's a 2-year window of just increasing your book value at the time of signing, right? So in a lot of cases, that's a good investment.
It is, unless you get injured, and that's that whole Billy Beane argument, Billy Beane being the president of baseball ops for the Oakland A's, and the great story Moneyball, the movie
Brad
Moneyball.
Pitt. We're in LA. We got
right. Bringing it back to entertainment. So he had this great thing of, he was a star center fielder for the New York Mets, like drafted by the Mets, never panned out, but he turned down a full ride scholarship to Stanford.
Oh, wow.
So that's the dilemma. So back to your question, it's very hard because you have to manage your roster that way, and you have to say, okay, well, you've got to figure I'm going to have to recruit. If I have 5 stars, I'm going to have to recruit 5 new stars each year.
Yeah.
But that's where the recruiting comes in, NIL money. Where are you at? Obviously, these blue chip programs like UCLA and Kentucky and Kansas, clearly Michigan, they're clearly going to have opportunities. Guys are always going to want to come there.
Right.
But I think the real value comes in coaching and also recruiting those players that are going to stay 4 years. So.
Yeah. I remember so in Canada, you can play 5 years. You can play a 5th year, and
that here too.
You can do that here.
Yeah.
And some players they'll play for 4 years and then they'll go away for a little bit, beef up, toughen up, and then if they come back to grad school,
right,
they'll play like another year. So every now and then, like you'll be like this. Like I remember I was this like 18-year-old scrawny little guy trying to fight, and some 5th-year player had come back. He was like 28. He was in law school.
Right.
I'm just using that as an example. I didn't know where he went, but he was like a man, like
totally
different body type. The body of a 28. It was like me playing against LeBron James, basically. Like coming back and having to play against an adult was not easy.
No,
yeah.
It's different. Like you can redshirt, you can get into graduate school, But yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of an unfortunate thing because those folks love to play, but it's unlikely that somebody that's that advanced is going to make it to the next level, right? Because they would have been playing in the major league by that point if that was the case.
Yeah. So how hard is it for you as a sports? Let's focus on the sports stuff. Let me know if you need to wrap.
Yeah,
I know
I got that appointment at 1:15.
Oh man, okay, yeah. Good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well, you let me know.
Okay.
Just give me a little hand signal and we'll be out. How hard is it to keep track of all the changes of all, like, okay, the entertainment stuff is exciting and interesting, and we can have a whole nother chat about that if you ever want to come back.
Sure.
But the sports stuff, I feel like with all the different leagues, professional and college, men and women, everything is changing. Like, how do you keep track of all the new laws, all the new rules, all the new, procedures that you have to master so that you don't fall foul and mess up some kid's career? Like, that would be crippling anxiety for me.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is you can rely on other people, right? So like I can rely on the agent and the agencies to do that sort of hand-holding work and deal with those issues. They're going to come to me and say, Jeremy, review this contract, help us broker this deal, which is my favorite, space to be, right? But I think for me that it's pretty simple. It's every morning I get up, I have a routine. I read The Hollywood Reporter, I read Front Office Sports, Billboard, Variety, all of them. Mm-hmm. I just keep up to date. I do a weekly podcast. I do a weekly column. And as you know, if you want to do a good podcast or a good article, a good column, you got to do the research.
Yeah.
So I think those are the ways that I keep up. Do I know everything? No, but I think that helps.
Yeah. I think good lawyers have good networks, right? And when they don't know something or something's a little bit out of their field, they know who to tap to get the right information. I think that's the key to everything.
100%.
Yeah. How far do you think we are? Just listening to your conversation has created 1,000 new questions.
I'll have to come back.
You have to come back.
Yeah.
How close do you think we are from like a UCLA, again, for example, just because we're here in LA? How far are we from like a UCLA just signing a deal with CAA as a school and then running everything for all their athletes through a massive agency? I'm just using CAA as an example because they're probably the biggest, and they have a sports agency division. So they're not just dealing with actors and producers and directors. Like, how far do you think we are away from schools bringing that in-house and hiring like their own agency to deal with it?
Well, normally I would say not too far off, especially considering UCLA's connection to entertainment and sports. The fact that it's in Beverly Hills, right there in Westwood, CAA's down the street in Century City. You would think the deal would be brokered, and especially with the Meta Westwood program, where they're recruiting money in, more management of that money. The problem is that these are all individual athletes at this current time. If it was unionized, 100%. But then again, the problem is that means that all those players would have to agree that CAA controls all this. I just don't see that happening because it would be treated more like the NFL. Certain players go with, or the NBA. Certain players go with WME. Certain players go with CAA or some other agency.
Right.
So I don't.
And if you're big, and if you're big enough, you build your own brand, like a Roger Federer or a Tiger Woods or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So, yeah, because having every athlete sign off on that collective would be near impossible. Like, because the way you're describing it to me, it almost sounds like the colleges really want to provide these athletes with like a universal basic income.
Sure.
Pulling a political phrase from DC, like they almost want to give all these athletes a universal basic income so that they can train and prepare themselves for their sport, for the betterment of the school and the community and their own careers. But it seems like it's going to be so different school by school. Like, at what stage, is the NCAA involved in this at all? Like, making sure that there's some equality or egalitarianism across the entire, how many NCAA schools are there? There's like 10,000 across 4 divisions or 5 divisions. Like, it would be impossible to police that.
For D1, there's 64 schools across like the Power 5 conferences or whatever. There's other schools beyond that, but Power 5 is 64. That's SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC. Obviously, no more Pac-12, or they got the Pac-2, but they're not considered a Power 5 anymore.
I forgot completely that they have the NCAA as a regulatory, and then you've got the divisions that they play in, and then you've got the actual school. There's so many layers of people just pulling pennies on every dollar.
Agreed. And so I think one of the issues is going to be regulation and all of that, but it's also going to be, the Power 5 or Power 4 has a lot of autonomy now. But the NCAA is involved. Charlie Baker is the former governor of Massachusetts, is now the president of the NCAA. And he's tried to introduce some things. They've tried to lobby Congress for a national NIL law. It's not going to happen. First of all, you can't get Congress to agree to that because the commandeering issue in constitutional law, if you say it was kind of like the PASPA Act for sports gambling, you can't force a state to do or not do something unless the government prevails in that space. So like, for example, in private contracting and sports gambling, the government wasn't doing anything to say, oh, we own gambling. We're doing a national network. So, of course, Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. If Congress were to come along and say, oh, we're going to pass a national NIL law in a private industry, that would be completely uncalled for in sort of a democratic republic type system, right?
Yeah.
Would never happen. And all those states that have those laws would immediately sue.
Right.
So the NCAA is trying, but I think at this point, the only thing they can do is issue regulations. And if you want to be a part of the country club, you want to be in NCAA, you got to follow those rules. So I think that's where you have NCAA come in and say, all right, you can't use NIL to recruit. NIL has to be tied to a service. That would be the big thing for me. The athlete has to do something, like post something on social media, do something for a brand. And if you are paying a universal income like you talked about, I don't know if that's the greatest idea, but I think maybe that's where it's headed. It would have to be the same for every athlete across every sport, because then you got Title IX issues.
What's Title IX?
Title IX basically says that with male and female, this was signed by President Nixon back in the 70s, passed by Congress, says that basically if you're a educational institution and you take federal dollars, so this applies to private and public institutions, and I'll maybe take like one more question and I gotta get going.
Of course.
But if you take federal dollars, you're subject to Title IX, which says that if you have men's and women's programs, sports programs, and let's say that you have some budget cuts, you can't go slash 25 women's programs and let's keep all the men's programs. There has to be quality in how you treat the programs.
Right.
This issue came about recently, last year, 2 years ago, with March Madness. And the women's teams were comparing the facilities and the bus rides and plane rides compared to the men. And then, of course, they made a bunch of changes saying, okay, we'll bring the women up to... The issue is, from a financial standpoint, is the men's programs make a ton of money.
A huge amount.
Right.
We just watched the Rose Bowl a couple of days ago.
Right.
I mean, like...
27 million people.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen on the women's side. There are contracts that are moving in that direction, but the average viewer is not tuning in to women's basketball, right? And that's not a detriment to them or a knock to that. It's just that's what the data shows, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately they have this dilemma of being like, okay, well, ultimately what ends up happening, and this is the main issue people don't talk about, is the NCAA or the money that's being put into with football and basketball is paying for a lot of other stuff. It's paying for other sports. It's paying for the non-revenue generating sports.
That's right.
And the academics.
Yeah. A few people have told me that, like Stanford's like football team or something like that generates more than enough capital to run a whole bunch of sporting teams that don't generate any money. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's nuts. Yeah.
All right, I know that you have to go.
Sir?
Man, thank you so much for swinging by. But you just created a whole new kind of level of understanding and more questions that I have. So I'm really thankful you swung by today.
Honored you had me. Thank you.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Come back anytime.
Will do.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, boss.
Thank you. Appreciate it.